We want to take a look at some of the other unique aspects of especially checking accounts. There are a couple of more moving parts and some other things that we need to do on our ends to be able to maintain and work with a checking account. As we said previously, a checking account is what we call a negotiable instrument. Basically, it can be used as a cash equivalent, and it's a promise to pay is really what this is. Rather than me handing you cash now, I can hand you this special financial document, which essentially says, I promise to pay you a specified sum of money as of a specific date. And then you indicate who exactly that money gets owed to. So in the financial world, this is essentially a cash equivalent. Okay. Um, when you do that, because it is not necessarily a cash exchange, there is a bit of a process that has to go on between your bank and the other person's bank in order to kind of really get the money. This check is just a promise to pay, but it isn't necessarily money itself, but it can be used in lieu of money. So here's kind of what happens. Let's say that you gave me a check for my birthday. Thank you. I now try to take that check and deposit it into my bank account. So I hand it to my bank and said, yep, please put this money in my account. Now, my bank has to go and get the money from your bank because this check is only a promise to pay. So my bank would contact your bank to try to get the funds that you had promised to pay me in the check. Your bank is going to look at your bank account, your checking account, to see, is there enough money in that account to be able to cover the check you just wrote? If there is enough money in there, the funds will be transferred back over to my bank. So that exchange will happen. If for whatever reason there are not enough funds in your checking account to be able to cover that check will get sent back to my bank, but it will be rejected, basically, which I think we'll talk about here in a second. We say that check bounced. There was not enough money in your bank account to be able to cover that promise that you made on that check. So this process is what we call the check has to clear. The check clearing has to go on. It's really just the process of my bank going to your bank to get the money that I'm owed, that I was promised, and retrieve it. All right, so that process is called check clearing. Now, this process, even in today's electronic age, is not instantaneous. This usually takes, and they generally tell you to please allow for 2 business days for a check to clear. Even though I was at my bank and in my mind, I put that $100 you gave to me in a check, I put it in my bank account, that money is not really available for me to actually use until the check clears your bank. Okay, so even in your mind, you may have deposited the check today. It's not going to the money won't actually appear in your account ready for you to spend and use until 2 business days have gone by. So if they can do it faster than that, great. But most times they tell you it's 2 business days for the check to clear. Okay, so if you're managing money that way, if you're paying attention to who's giving you money, you have to just keep that in mind. Even things like your paycheck. If you get paid by a check from your employer, it takes a day or so for that check to clear, to actually make sure that the money shows up in your account. We would like to take a look at some of the information that's going on your check. There's a lot of information there. I don't know if you've ever really looked at a check, but there is a ton of stuff going on here. So we're going to kind of go around and just see what is happening on this check and what does all this information mean. Usually on your check will be your name. Sometimes it'll have the address, but at least we'll have the name of the depositor, the name of the people who are on the account. If you had a joint checking account, some of your parents may have a joint checking account where maybe your mother and your father both have their name on the account. These are kind of maybe the people who are allowed to interact with the bank account, are allowed to write checks off the bank account. but your name will probably show up on your check somewhere. Next, item number 2 there is where it says pay to the order of. This is called the payee. This is the person you are giving money to. So in this, whatever this $25 check to Bob's service station, this is the payee, the person who will be receiving the check. Next are the dates on the check. Every check should be dated. The date does matter. The date is used first to see when is this check valid. If I wrote today, today being March 30th, if I wrote a check today and I dated it for April 29th, that check can't be used and cannot be cashed until that date comes up. So even if I gave you the check today on the 30th and I said that it was not, I dated it April 29th, you're not going to be able to do anything with that check until April 29th. If I date it to you today and give it to you today, that check is eligible to be used right then and there. Number 2, sometimes that date on that check can also be used to help track checks. If there's something goes wrong, we have a question about a check, sometimes we'll look at the date that the check was written. So please make sure you date your checks. Every check is also numbered. So usually in the top right-hand corner, there will be a number. That's going to be an important reference number later on in case you have to track down a check, in case you have to get more information about a check. The check number is a really good thing to be able to pay attention to. Next, you will write out the amount of the amount of check written out in numbers. You actually put the numerical value of the check. We'll come back to that in a second. And then right below that, there is also a line there for you to be able to write out the amount in words. So if you look, we'll not only write 25.00, but we'll also write $25. Okay. Number 1, this is a bit of a way to make sure that the money the amount that shows up here matches the amount that shows up here. What do I mean by this? I'm going to do this for a second. What if you wrote me this check and I come in here and I do this? And all of a sudden now I make your $25 check into a $185 check. The words here are going to help kind of safeguard against that, right? So this number here has to match the amount that is written there. If the bank were to get this, the bank could reject this check at this point. So no, this is not a valid check. Okay. There's also this interesting way of writing it out. You'll spell out the name or the words for the numbers. And then I've seen this notation used when you're talking about cents. So if this check was $25.75, you would write 25 and 75 out of 100. You kind of write in this interesting fraction notation. So that's the way you would write out the amount of the check in words. On the bottom, usually the bottom right side of your check is a place for you to sign. Because this is a legal document, this is the place you're going to legally authorize that basically from you, I promise to pay this person this amount of money on this date. Right? And here is your legal signature that says, yep, I approve this. Okay. If you give me a check that is not signed, I cannot do anything with it. Right? Your signature is important. That's the authorization for Bob's Service Station to actually do anything with this money. Then there's all of these numbers on the bottom of your check. Okay. These numbers, and I'll point them out here in a second, these are 3 very important pieces of information down here. First, usually at the end of this sequence, all the way on the right, here is the check number, and those will usually match what is shown up here. Some of the bank's equipment can read this information, so that's why the check number appears in 2 places. This series of numbers right here is the depositor's account number. This is your checking account number. Later on, we're going to see that if you need to know your checking account number, the easiest place to do that is on the bottom of your checks. It will also show up on your bank statements and other documents you may get from the bank, but the easiest place to find your checking account number will be here. And then this last series of numbers all the way here to the left, this is what's called the bank's routing number. The routing number is a unique identifier for your bank. So sometimes you'll have to provide this information to different places if you're like using your bank account. For example, when I had to set up direct deposit for my paycheck, I had to tell St. Edmund Prep that here is my bank's routing number and the bank and my account number so that they would know where to put my paycheck. All right. So this is the unique identifying number for your particular bank. Okay. So though you kind of think about it is that, yep, at this bank from this account number, this check was written. That's the way I kind of think about it that way. And finally, there's a field usually on the left side of your check there for what we call the memo field. The memo field is really just a note. It's a note for yourself to be able to know what the heck did I write a $25 check to Bob's service station for? That was for an oil change. So this is just a memo. It's a note for you to tell what this check was written for. The bank, quite honestly, doesn't care about the memo. You care about the memo. Sometimes you can write whatever you want in here. Sometimes, let's say you were paying for, you were paying for tuition at St. Edmund Prep, or you were paying for the prom, whatever. Maybe we will tell you, hey, please write whatever in the memo field so that we know when we get the check, we can actually use it and keep track of it that way. Sometimes I've done it before where I'm paying a bill for something, and they'll ask me to put in the memo field your account number so they know kind of what account to put this check for. All right, so you can write whatever you want in the memo field. You should get in the habit of writing things in the memo field. Okay, and then usually somewhere on your check will also be the name of your bank or your credit union or financial institution, whatever it is. So, right, so this is a lot of information going on the check here, and you should know what some of these things are. The really important stuff: check numbers. Make sure you date your checks, because this is the day when the check can actually be usable. Who are you writing the check to? Who are you trying to pay? For how much? And you write the amount in 2 spots. Please make sure you sign your check, add a memo, and this information here is just something you're going to want to have for you: the routing number, your account number, and the check number.